All right, everyone, this is going to be your morning cars routine. To start out, take a deep breath in, pack the air down in your stomach, tighten your core, and irradiate tension through your whole body, holding an isometric flex at about 20 or 30%. We're going to isolate one joint at a time and then move that joint through as much range of motion as we can possibly get. Now the joint that you're moving, you're going to pretend as if you're moving that joint through really thick air or maybe something like cotton candy. So you're getting as much range of motion as you can, trying to constantly expand the circle, but moving slowly and deliberately. There's some cues for the cervical spine. Start off by scraping your chin along your collarbone, emptying your ear back over your shoulder, rotating around, and letting your eyes lead you through this. The further you look, trying to get more and more range of motion each and every time. You're going to hopefully do 2 to 3 rounds in each direction, then reverse direction, do another 2 to 3 rotations, and move on to the next joint. Moving on to scapular cars, raise the shoulder blades up towards your ear, press and separate forward, lower them down into your back pocket, then retract and squeeze together. Really concentrate on initiating that motion from your shoulder blades and not letting your elbows and arms bend. Next up is spinal rotation. Again, deep breath, irradiate tension to about 30%. Start to crunch down, getting as much separation in between your vertebrae as you can without letting your hips move back. Rotate to the right, side bend and extend. Rotate back to center. Again, don't let your hips move if possible. Side bend and extend left, and rotate back. Again, you're going to do 2 or 3 rotations in one direction, then reverse direction, do 2 or 3 to the other side. If you're short on time and you can only do 1 rotation in each direction, that's fine. The most important thing is to do at least 1 round every single day. If at any point during these rotations you start to feel pain, stop and back out of that range of motion a little bit. Make your circles smaller. We want to increase range of motion, but not create any pain. Next up is shoulders. Deep breath, irradiate tension. Make a fist with one hand, open up the other. Externally rotate the shoulder, bring it up and across your chest, reaching as high as you can before having to internally rotate. Moving your arm back behind you. Thumb ends up by your pocket. Reverse the motion. Extend back, keep reaching before having to rotate that shoulder back in. Get as high as possible and return to the starting position. Going to move on to a side view here. Again, deep breath, irradiate, externally rotate your shoulder, start moving through as much range of motion as you can. Try not to overextend your back. You can see that I do it a little bit there, and that's a pretty common fault when you're trying to get more range overhead. Going to show an option for both shoulders at the same time. Deep breath, irradiate, externally rotate your shoulders. Try and bring your pinkies together. Keep your arms straight, reach as high as you can. Try not to overextend the lower back. Internally rotate when you can't get any more motion. Your thumbs will end up pointed back. Reverse direction. Again, this is an option if you are a little bit short on time, although I'd recommend doing one shoulder at a time if you can. This is going to be for your elbows, and yes, you can get some rotation in your elbows. So externally rotate, curl up, internally rotate, press down. Reverse direction, do 2 to 3 rounds. After a little bit of practice, you'll start to see that you can identify how your elbow actually does rotate a little bit. Next up is your wrist. Palms up, hands flat. Keep your elbows at your side. Trick to this is imagining that you're balancing a cup of water on your forearm. Or if you want to get creative, you can actually put your cell phone on your forearm. Trust me, you won't let it drop. Another option, if you're really having trouble isolating the wrist, is simply to hold on with your opposite hand and do one wrist at a time. But with a little bit of practice, you'll definitely be able to isolate the wrist without moving your elbow or your shoulder or anything else. All right, this is definitely going to be the hardest one, is the hips. Nobody likes doing these. Doing this correctly is really going to require that you keep your core and your balanced leg tight. You can definitely see that I struggle with it a little bit and I'm holding on to something else for balance. You could use a dowel or a wall or whatever you have to help you make this more of a rotational hip exercise and not necessarily a balance exercise. From the side view now, raise my inner ankle up towards my waist, open the hip, internally rotate, trying not to move anything else except that hip joint. Reversing the motion. Coming up, externally rotating at the top, fighting for every inch I can. Since hips are so difficult, I'm going to throw in some easier options. One is to do it from a quadruped position, but the motion of the hip is going to be exactly the same. I like to concentrate on keeping my opposite arm completely straight. People have a tendency to bend that elbow and start to tilt to try and get more space. Last option for the hips, lay on your side. Punch your bottom arm straight out, brace your core, deep breath, grip over the top with your other hand, and then start moving your hip through that range of motion. All of these are essentially just different options for moving your hip through the same range of motion, but the last two are going to be a little bit easier if you're having problems with balance or tilting. Moving on to spinal extension and flexion. Start in full extension, and then just imagine that you're moving one vertebrae at a time, starting at your tailbone, slowly opening up and getting as much range of motion as you can from each vertebrae before moving on to the next. You'll end up in this arch position and then reverse the motion by starting again at your tailbone and extending as much as you possibly can for each separate segment before moving on to the next. Once you've done one round starting from your tailbone, start the next round from your cervical spine. Go slow, try and get as much range of motion out of each vertebrae as possible. Get that arch as high as you possibly can. And then when you're ready, reverse and start again up by your neck. And try to get as much extension through each vertebrae before you end that set. Moving on to the knee. Deep breath in. Radiate, brace your core. Isolate the knee by lifting your leg off the ground, supporting it with your hands on your thigh just above the knee. Rotate out, extend up, rotate in, flex down, reverse the motion. Most people think that knees and elbows just hinge. You actually can get a little bit of rotation out of them, but it's going to take a few weeks of practice before you really start to become aware of it. Moving to the other side, again, rotate out, extend up, rotate in, flex down, reverse the motion. Last is the ankle. To isolate your ankle, take your outside arm, put it underneath your thigh, grip your opposite bicep, and take your opposite hand and put it on top of your kneecap. Just some light pressure to cue you to not move your knee. Imagine pressing a gas pedal down, rotate in, flex up, trying to make that circle as big as you can, then reverse the motion. Keep trying to expand the circle with each rotation. For all of these controlled articular rotations, you want the motion to be as smooth as possible. You'll see that when you're doing the ankles, they kind of have this jerky stop and start motion more than the other joints that you will really notice. But for the most part, try and keep everything as smooth and at the same speed as possible while continuing to expand that circle. Once you've had a little bit of practice, you can do this whole routine, full 2 or 3 rounds in about 10 minutes. But if you only have 5 minutes, that's okay. Just make sure you do at least 1 round every single day. Doing this routine every single day will keep your joints active and healthy. It'll increase your range of motion. And if you come across any pain, those will be areas you can point out to a therapist or a trainer.